So we're going to go over and talk about data. So this is our ingredients, but no pie. So that's when we say we just take our data and we put it straight onto PowerPoint and don't think about how we're going to present it. So the solution for this is going to be to add context. And we've got 3 different ways that we go about doing that. First level is to simplify our background in our data. Second is to emphasize the important data. And then the third is to explain the results and the meaning. So level 1, simplify background data. This is a slide from Randy Lewis's presentation. He does amazing research on spider silk. And there's actually a really, really great story that's going on here. Do we have any engineers or physicists here in this room? Anyone? Do you see the great stuff that's happening with this data here? Do you understand what's going on? No. I don't even know like what any of these mean. I don't know what they mean. And there's a lot of plus, like, I don't know what this means. And this was for a layperson audience. What he was talking about is they take this spider silk and they treat it 3 different times. And as it gets treated each of these 3 different times, the diameter of this silk gets smaller. At the same time, the strength, the elasticity go up. That's a really impressive thing. But you can't tell on this. So what we did was we turned this, we simplified the data on this table. I didn't know what any of those symbols meant, so we simply, we talked about and we spelled out the symbols, microns, megapascals, percent, so that people could understand what they are. And then we pulled images when he talked about before from the different stages so that people would remember, oh, we're talking about how they treat these, and he already explained this to us. Now we can see what the results were. I think we missed an opportunity here because I was too afraid of using multiple axis scales to be able to show all of these going up, but we didn't miss that opportunity on this next example, which was one that we just barely recently did for our last Summarize session with Brian Higginbotham, and he was talking about evaluating classes that Extension puts on for dating. And so it was a pre and post test situation where respondents talked about how much they agreed with these following statements. And if you spent some time with the data, you'd realize that there is improvement in each of these statements between the pre-test and the post-test. But rather than just let people try and figure out the data on their own, we decided it might be much easier just to show them. So here we've got a scale of disagreement to agreement, which wasn't included in the original table, and then the 3 statements are included as the categories at the bottom of this bar graph. And then we can show here are the results of the pre-test, and then here's the improvement from the post-test. Instead of interpreting these numbers in your head, all of a sudden you can see exactly which ones had the greatest improvement. So with this one, knowing the pros and cons before allowing your relationship to go to the next level, you know, that's where Brian Higginbotham had the most success. All right, second is emphasizing relevant points. And that's being able to help pull out the specific parts of data that you want them to see. Here's one that I just barely worked on. This was a graph that we used to evaluate what the credit loads of USU students were, how much they were taking, and whether they were taking more over time. The data here is actually really, really impressive, but it's hard to tell. And I can do this, and you say, if you look at 2010 to 2014, you can check that this 590 is different from this 847. But we decided that this wasn't a compelling enough story. So when we put this together, we created a custom graph to be able to show that actual line. So you can see the modal distribution between the low credits, the medium credits, and the full course credit loads. And then we overlaid years on top of each other. So you can see fall 2012, then we bring on fall 2013, and you can see a few more students taking the more intense credit loads. And then finally to fall 2014, then you can see that we're actually doing what we said we were going to do, because you can see that bump on the higher course intensity for these students. Okay, 3, explain the results. You can show them what it is, but then also you can include information on your data slides that really help to drive home the main points of what you're trying to communicate. Here is some data from Vonda Jump, who was doing some work on evaluating the effectiveness of infant massage for babies in orphanages in developing countries. And so they had a control group and they had a test group to see whether these babies were healthier and better by having infant massage done on them every day. And so you can look here, but you have to do a lot of math in your head to figure out, well, what does this mean? So when we remade this table, we just simply put the numbers back on here, but as she was talking, we overlaid the numbers with the actual message points, which really helped to drive her point home. Massage babies were more likely to be well. Massage babies were less likely to have diarrhea, and babies were less fussy and increased their interaction skills. And all of a sudden, the data is showing something also specific. Okay, 3 levels plus an extra credit is to remake others' graphs and data. How many of you have ever used someone else's graph or data in your PowerPoint presentation? Perhaps from a textbook, or from a professor, or from another colleague that you've been working with. Sometimes this can be hard to do, but this is what I strive to do, and something that can be hard. This is a slide from Susanna French in biology, and she's investigating lizards on the island. She's not talking about tourism itself, so she borrowed this graph to talk about the effects that tourism have had on the lizard population in the Galapagos Islands. And so this is what it looked like, and it created a lot of problems for her in the fact that, first of all, it's ugly, but second of all, you have way too many zeros over on your axis to understand what the meaning is. And she wanted to have some ability to be able to have different things pop up at different times. So we took the time to remake this, which made it a lot easier for her to be able to make the salient points. So she starts with what's happening in the 1970s and 1980s with our key, and then she shows the growth of what has been happening within the last 20 years with tourism. And she shows that we've got, and then she explains what those changes were. So up until 1990, you just have nature enthusiasts who are going to the Galapagos, and then now it's ecotourism pilgrimages. And so she's able to show the numbers first before explaining the meaning behind the numbers. And that is how to deal with data.